When I finally sat down with Sophie, I tried to steady my thoughts, prepared to put my feelings out there and truly listen to hers. I led into it by telling her what had been weighing on me lately. You know, I began, watching her expression, sometimes it feels like we're living side by side, almost like neighbors. We're here for the kids, of course, and I love that, but it's starting to feel like, that's all there is. She looked at me, and there was something in her eyes I hadn't noticed in a while, maybe a flicker of recognition, maybe relief, like she'd been feeling it, too. Sophie stayed silent, her hands resting on the table, waiting for me to continue. I don't want to wake up one day when the kids are gone and feel like, we've grown so far apart, there's nothing left. I miss you, Sophie. I miss us. Sophie blinked, her mouth opening as if she was going to say something, but then she paused. Her voice was soft when she finally spoke. I get it, Jack. I feel it too. Sometimes, I look at us, at how we're always moving around each other, making plans, managing schedules, but barely seeing each other. It scares me, too. She took a deep breath and looked down, her fingers tracing an invisible line on the table. What would it even look like to have more time for us? To not just be about the kids? Her words hung in the air, a kind of longing that I hadn't heard in years. I realized she wasn't just giving me what I wanted to hear. This was something she genuinely felt but hadn't voiced until now. We could start small, I suggested. Just you and me, setting aside time that isn't about chores or kids or routines. I mean, remember when we used to go out on Friday nights just to unwind? Or even just the way we'd sit together, talking late into the night? Sophie's face softened, and for a moment, I saw a glimpse of the woman I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. I do remember that, she murmured, almost as if talking to herself. It was easy then, wasn't it? Just us, no other responsibilities. We weren't afraid of anything. I reached across the table, covering her hand with mine. I think we can find that again. But it might mean we both have to put in a little more effort to make it work, to not lose each other in the process of raising them. She smiled, a genuine, slightly wistful smile that made my chest feel lighter. I'd like that. I'd like to feel like we're more than just parents who happen to share a house. Our conversation lingered late into the evening, touching on things we hadn't talked about in years. It felt vulnerable, a bit raw, but real, more real than we'd been in a long time. When we finally went to bed, it wasn't like we'd suddenly solved everything. But there was something new between us, a thread that connected us again, not just as parents but as partners. I went to sleep hopeful, wondering if maybe, just maybe, we were about to start finding each other all over again. The next day I suggested that we go to the movies with Sophie. We chose a comedy, found our theater, and took our seats. The movie was good, and Sophie went to the bathroom for a few minutes. My heart sank as I stared at Sophie's phone, the message glaring at me like an accusation I didn't want to face. Your Jack is kind of boring, tell him how much fun we had in the back row of the movie. The words felt surreal, mocking even, as if this stranger wanted me to know what they'd done together, right here, in this very theater. I glanced around the dimly lit room, trying to make out the faces in the shadows, wondering if this person was watching me, if they knew I'd seen the message. The thought of someone lurking close by, someone who knew Sophie in a way I hadn't even considered, made my skin crawl. I felt like I was being played, but I didn't know by whom, or, worst of all, why. Sophie returned a moment later, sliding into her seat with a casual smile. She looked over at me, but I was frozen, my eyes fixed on her phone. She noticed and followed my gaze, her face going pale as she realized I had seen the message. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. For a few agonizing seconds, she looked as if she were searching for the right response, something that could somehow explain all this away. What is this? I finally managed, my voice barely a whisper, strangled by the disbelief and betrayal coursing through me. She swallowed, her eyes wide and panicked, her hands instinctively reaching for the phone. Jack, it's not what you think, she stammered, her voice shaky, almost pleading. What am I supposed to think, Sophie? I said, louder this time, my words trembling. Someone in this room sent you that text. Someone who's apparently close enough to know who I am and where we are. Her face contorted, a mixture of fear and guilt. She glanced nervously over her shoulder, as if expecting to see the sender lurking just a few rows back. Jack, please, she whispered, leaning closer as though her proximity could soften the blow. I can explain. I didn't mean for this to happen. I thought I could keep it separate from us. My stomach twisted as she said that last word, separate from us, as though her life with me was just one part of something else, something that had led her to a stranger with the audacity to flaunt their connection while I sat here, clueless. Separate? I repeated, my voice tinged with bitterness. You're here with me, Sophie. Right now. And yet, there's someone else, someone who has enough confidence to text you while we're together. The movie played on in the background, scenes and sounds blurring as I struggled to keep my voice calm, not wanting to make a scene, though every fiber of my being screamed to demand answers, here and now. Sophie took a deep breath, casting one last glance around us before she turned her gaze back to me. It was just a mistake, she said quietly. I was feeling, I don't know, lost, maybe? After everything we talked about, I thought I could just close that door and move on. But I didn't. And now, her voice trailed off, the admission hanging heavy in the air between us. I clenched my jaw, barely able to look at her. So, what was it then, Sophie? A fling? A thrill to pass the time? I looked away, trying to gather my thoughts. But they were spinning out of control, fueled by anger, hurt, and an overwhelming sense of betrayal. She swallowed hard, her voice low and uncertain. I didn't want you to find out like this, Jack. I didn't want you to get hurt. The words only added fuel to the fire, a reminder that, somehow, she'd convinced herself that she was still protecting me, even as she played this game right under my nose. Protect me? I nearly laughed, my voice hollow and bitter. The only thing you protected was your secret. You didn't stop to think what this would do to us, Sophie, to our family. You didn't stop to think at all. She flinched, and for a brief moment, I saw the guilt flash across her face, raw and unguarded. But it did nothing to ease the ache building inside me, a gnawing realization that everything we'd shared, every moment I thought was ours alone, was tainted now by her lies. Sophie looked down, twisting her fingers nervously. I don't know what to say, Jack, she murmured. I didn't mean for this to go this far. I didn't respond, my mind racing with questions, accusations, and a hollow, empty feeling that I couldn't shake. I knew, even as we sat there in the theater, that whatever happened next would change everything. The credits rolled, and the lights came up. We sat in silence for a moment before I stood, unable to bear being in that room a second longer. I could feel Sophie's gaze on me as I walked out, waiting, maybe even hoping for something that would show I still cared enough to stay. But all I could feel was the weight of her betrayal, dragging me down with every step. That night, as I lay in bed, my mind churned, replaying the events of the evening and the quiet, fearful admission in her voice. The world I thought I knew had shifted, leaving me grappling with the emptiness of a life that no longer felt like my own. I knew, as I lay there in the darkness, that Sophie and I had a choice to make. But I didn't know if we could ever find our way back from this, or if there was even a path left to follow. The next morning, I woke up with a cold, steely resolve. Sophie was still asleep, her face peaceful, as if yesterday had never happened, as if our lives weren't teetering on the edge of a cliff. But for me, there was no peace, no calm. Only questions that needed answers. I knew that if there was any chance for us to survive this, I had to know the truth, every excruciating detail. I got up quietly and took her phone, which she'd left on the nightstand. I hesitated for a moment, my thumb hovering over the screen, before I unlocked it. Part of me felt like an intruder, like I was crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. But she had already broken the boundaries of our marriage. This was my way of finding out just how far she'd gone. As I scrolled through her messages, I felt a growing sense of dread. The name, Jason, appeared over and over, laced with casual intimacies, and I could feel my heart pound harder with every text. He was the one who had sent the message in the theater. Their conversations were peppered with laughter, inside jokes, shared plans, everything that I thought was exclusive to us. Then, I found it, a string of messages that left no room for doubt. Last night was incredible. Can't wait to see you again. You looked so beautiful. It was hard to keep my hands to myself in public. Think your Jack suspects anything? My jaw clenched as I read those words, my mind trying to process the fact that Sophie had not only stepped out of our marriage but had somehow managed to weave this entire web of deception behind my back. I took a deep breath, pushing back the surge of anger and hurt. If I confronted her now, without all the details, I knew it would only lead to more questions, more uncertainty. I needed clarity. I needed to understand exactly what they'd done, why it happened, and if it was still happening. Later that day, I decided to track down this Jason. It took some digging, but eventually, I found his profile on social media, an account full of flashy photos, frequent check-ins at trendy bars, and a personality that seemed designed to project confidence and charm. I studied his face, his smirking smile, and wondered what had drawn Sophie to him. What was it about this man that had caused her to risk everything we'd built? I messaged him, initially pretending to be someone interested in his work to get him to respond. But I soon grew tired of the pretense and got straight to the point. I know about you and Sophie. I need to understand what's been going on between you two. It took a few minutes, but Jason finally replied. Wow, didn't expect to hear from you. I thought she would have told you by now. My heart pounded as his response flashed on the screen. Told me. It was as if he assumed Sophie had been planning to come clean, like this was something they'd openly discussed. Did you two have sex? I typed, barely able to keep my hands steady. Yeah, we did. But it was more than that. We just clicked. She said she felt trapped with you. I gave her freedom. Freedom. That word hit me like a punch to the gut. Freedom from what? From the life we'd built together? From the commitments, from our love? I wasn't done. I needed to know how long this had been going on, if it was a fling or something deeper. I asked him when it started. It's been a few months now, he responded nonchalantly. I thought you knew, man. Didn't expect to get a message from you. The casual tone, the lack of remorse, it drove me to the edge. I realized that he saw me as some distant, irrelevant figure, someone who barely factored into the equation of their relationship. I felt anger rising within me, the kind that I hadn't known I was capable of. But more than anger, I felt a hollow ache, a sense of betrayal so deep it seemed to seep into every part of me. The worst part was that I'd gone to Sophie the night before, opened myself up, and shared my fears about us drifting apart, and in response, she'd chosen to keep her affair hidden. She'd looked me in the eye and promised we'd find each other again, all while hiding this from me. As I stared at the screen, I knew I couldn't keep this bottled up. I had to confront her, to lay it all out and demand the truth. I had to see if there was anything left in our marriage worth fighting for. That evening, when Sophie came home, I was waiting in the kitchen, her phone in hand. I watched her face as she walked in, the relaxed look in her eyes fading as she took in my expression, the phone gripped tightly in my hand. I know about Jason, I said, my voice colder than I'd ever heard it before. Her face paled, and she took a step back, instinctively raising a hand to her mouth. For a moment, we stood there in silence, the weight of her betrayal hanging thick in the air. I was going to tell you, she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. Were you? I demanded, the bitterness lacing my words. You were going to tell me while you lied to me last night? When I was being open and honest with you, hoping to fix things? Her eyes darted away, unable to meet my gaze. I didn't want to hurt you, Jack. I didn't want you to find out this way. Find out what? That you were sleeping with someone else? That you had some fling with a guy who thinks he gave you freedom? I spat the word, feeling a wave of anger rise as I recalled Jason's arrogant response. She took a shaky breath, her shoulders sagging. It wasn't just about sex, Jack. I felt alive with him, something I hadn't felt in years. I was lost, and he gave me a way out, something I didn't even know I was looking for. A way out? I scoffed, barely able to control the rage burning inside. You had a way out, you could have come to me. We could have worked on this together. But instead, you chose to destroy everything behind my back. Her face crumpled, and she took a step forward, reaching out as though to touch my hand, but I pulled away. Jack, please. I didn't want to hurt you, but I was suffocating. I didn't know how to say it, how to make you understand. I stood there, trying to keep my emotions in check. I needed to know the truth, Sophie, and now that I do, I don't know if I can forgive this. I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way. Tears filled her eyes as she tried to explain, to defend her choices, but it was too late. The damage was done. I felt like a stranger in my own life, a bystander watching as the foundation of my world crumbled around me. I thought you wanted us to move forward, she whispered, her voice choked. That's why I was going to end it with him, to focus on us. I took a deep breath, feeling a hollowness settle inside me. It's a bit late for that, Sophie. Moving forward means we have to be honest, to trust each other. And right now, I don't know if I can trust you. In that moment, I realized that whatever happened next, there would be no going back to the way things were. Sophie had made a choice, one that shattered the life we'd built together. Whether we could rebuild it, I didn't know. But one thing was certain, she was no longer the woman I thought she was, and I was no longer the man who would blindly believe in her. Sophie stood there, tears streaming down her face, her expression a twisted mixture of regret, shame, and defiance. I could see she was desperate for a chance to explain, but the words, the justifications, they all fell flat. There was nothing she could say to fill the gaping wound she'd left in our marriage. I was going to end it, Jack, she repeated, voice shaky but firm, as if saying it again would somehow make it better, would somehow undo the betrayal. I know you don't believe me, but it's true. I chose you. I was lost, and I needed something to make me feel alive. But it didn't mean I stopped loving you. Love? I shook my head, bitterness flooding my voice. You talk about love as if it's a game, something you can turn off and on whenever it's convenient. If you loved me, you'd have come to me instead of finding someone else to fill whatever void you felt. You knew I was trying, Sophie. You knew I was reaching out, and you chose to lie to me. She looked down, a hand pressed to her mouth as though to hold back a sob. But my anger was relentless, an unyielding fire that refused to die down. I'd come to her with everything I had, hoping we could repair what had been damaged, and she'd met my vulnerability with deception. After a long, painful silence, Sophie finally looked up, her eyes red, her face pale. I didn't want to lose us, Jack, she whispered. I thought that if I could have something on the side, something that didn't interfere with us, then maybe we could keep everything together. I let out a hollow laugh, unable to hide my disbelief. You really thought that would keep us together? You thought a lie, a betrayal, a hidden life would somehow help us? Sophie's gaze dropped again, and she wrung her hands as though searching for the right response. But I was done waiting for her to come up with excuses. I needed answers, yes, but more than that, I needed to decide if there was anything here worth saving. Tell me everything, I demanded, my voice flat. No more hiding. I want to know how long this has been going on, what you two did, everything. If you think there's any chance of me staying after all this, I need the truth. She hesitated, looking like a trapped animal, but finally, she took a shuddering breath and nodded. It started a few months ago, she admitted. I met him at that work event in April. We got to talking, and I don't know, Jack. I didn't plan on it. But he made me feel something that I hadn't felt in a long time. Like I was wanted. Her words were like a blade twisting in my chest. Wanted, had I failed her so badly that she'd needed someone else to feel wanted? I clenched my fists, feeling the anger course through me again. So you had your fling, I said coldly. And it wasn't just once, was it? She shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. No. It wasn't just once. But it was physical, yes, but it was also a way for me to feel like I had control over something. Like I could have something for myself. I took a deep breath, trying to hold back the tidal wave of rage and hurt. And you thought I'd never find out? She shook her head. I thought I'd end it, that you'd never have to know. I was wrong. I should have. I should have told you, I know that now. But you didn't, I replied, my voice edged with cold finality. You didn't tell me. Instead, you sat across from me, day after day, night after night, and lied. And then last night, when I thought we were trying to reconnect, you still kept it a secret. How am I supposed to believe anything you say, Sophie? How am I supposed to trust you again? Sophie let out a small, broken sob. Jack, please, I'm begging you. Don't let this be the end. I know I don't deserve it, but please give me a chance to make it right. I don't want to lose you. I'll do anything to fix this. I'll go to therapy, counseling, whatever it takes. I shook my head, looking away, my mind a whirlwind of emotions I could barely contain. Part of me wanted to walk away right then, to leave her with her guilt and her choices. But another part of me, the part that remembered the years we'd shared, the life we'd built, wanted to hold on, to believe that maybe, just maybe, this could be salvaged. I don't know, Sophie, I said finally, my voice weary. I don't know if there's anything left to fix. You've destroyed the foundation of everything I believed in. And trust isn't something you can just rebuild overnight. She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. I understand that. But please, Jack, I'm begging you. Just give me a chance. Let's try. I'll do whatever it takes. I'll prove to you that I can be the wife you deserve. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her so badly. But the pain was still raw, the betrayal too fresh. I knew that whatever choice I made, it would change our lives forever. Finally, I looked at her, and the exhaustion of it all weighed down on me. Fine, I said, my voice hollow. We'll try. But it's not a guarantee, Sophie. I need time, and I need you to understand that things may never go back to how they were. She nodded, relief flooding her expression. Thank you, Jack. I promise, I'll make it right. I'll prove to you that you can trust me again. As I looked at her, I couldn't help but wonder if that was even possible. Could I ever truly forgive her? Could I look at her without seeing the lies, the betrayal, the image of her with someone else? I didn't know. But for now, it was all I had to hold on to. And as we sat there in silence, the weight of what lay ahead loomed over us, a path fraught with uncertainty, pain, and maybe, just maybe, a sliver of hope. I decided to ask Sophie to call Jason and tell him that everything was over and that he shouldn't call or write to her anymore. She nodded again, her eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and relief, as if the reality of what she'd almost lost had finally hit her. I swear, Jack, I'll do everything I can to make this right. I know I can't erase what I did, but I'm here, and I'll be here for as long as it takes. As the words hung in the air between us, I realized that while the call had given me a sense of closure, it hadn't lessened the hurt. It would take time, patience, and a level of forgiveness I wasn't sure I possessed. But at least, for now, I'd seen her choose me, if only for a moment. We sat there in silence, the weight of her promise settling between us like an invisible barrier, separating us from the life we'd once shared, from the trust we'd once taken for granted. And as we looked at each other, each lost in our own thoughts, I couldn't help but wonder if we'd ever find our way back to what we once had, or if we were just two strangers, trying to rebuild something that had already been shattered beyond repair. A month has passed. Everyone tried to improve relations. To dilute them with something new and interesting. I decided to invite Sophie to the restaurant. As we sat across from each other in the cozy corner booth, surrounded by the familiar ambience of the restaurant where we'd shared our first date all those years ago, I felt, for the first time in a long time, a semblance of the connection we once had. The candlelight flickered between us, and Sophie looked at me with a softness in her eyes that I hadn't seen since before everything had fallen apart. She wore a dress I remembered from a different time, her hair loose over her shoulders, and for a fleeting moment, I could almost believe we were just two people in love, unaffected by the betrayals that had nearly torn us apart. We reminisced about our early days, laughing at memories of our awkward first date, sharing the little moments that had brought us together back then. For that brief evening, it felt like we were creating something new, something that could begin to cover over the cracks left by her affair. I could feel the weight of our history with each shared glance, each familiar laugh. She even reached across the table and took my hand, squeezing it gently, like she was afraid to let go. I squeezed back, feeling a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, we were on the right path. But then, as if fate had its own twisted sense of timing, I saw him. Jason. He walked in with a woman, younger than Sophie, laughing loudly, arm around her shoulder, entirely unaware of our presence. The sight of him, here in this restaurant, our restaurant, hit me like a punch to the gut. My entire body tensed, and the hand that had been holding Sophie's went cold. She felt the change immediately, and I could see the worry cloud her face as she turned to follow my gaze. Her expression shifted in an instant, the same shock and discomfort tightening her features. She looked back at me, guilt flickering in her eyes, as if she was being forced to confront the consequences of her choices all over again. The spell we'd worked so hard to build over the past month shattered in that one painful moment. Jason hadn't seen us yet. He was still wrapped up in his date, laughing, talking easily, seemingly without a care in the world. But I couldn't take my eyes off him. I felt a surge of anger, an urge to go over there and confront him, to make him feel even a fraction of the hurt he'd brought into my life. I could feel Sophie's hand on mine, but I pulled away, clenching my fist as I forced myself to stay in place. Jack, Sophie whispered, her voice filled with a plea, as if she were hoping she could somehow defuse the tension that had risen between us. Please. Just ignore him. Let's not let him ruin this. But the anger was there, a fire that wouldn't die down, a reminder of everything we'd been through. Ignore him? I muttered, keeping my voice low but firm. After everything he did? He's sitting here, in the same restaurant we came to, like he has every right to just move on and enjoy his life? Sophie's face softened, a flash of sadness in her eyes. I know, Jack. I know this is hard. But tonight was supposed to be about us. We can't let him ruin it. The rational part of me knew she was right. We'd come here to rebuild, to focus on us, to find some sliver of the connection we'd lost. But the sight of Jason, so carefree, enjoying himself as if none of this had affected him, twisted the knife in a way I hadn't anticipated. The anger simmered beneath the surface, gnawing at me, filling me with a need for. I wasn't even sure what. Closure, perhaps. Or maybe just to show him that I knew. Just stay here, I told Sophie, standing up before she could stop me. Jack, please, she murmured, reaching for my arm, but I gently shrugged her off. I walked over to his table, my footsteps heavy, my chest tight with adrenaline. Jason looked up, his expression shifting from confusion to recognition in an instant. His date glanced at me curiously, clearly sensing the sudden tension. Jack, he said, his tone uneasy. He looked uncomfortable, caught off guard, but he quickly composed himself, forcing a smile as if he could charm his way out of this confrontation. Didn't expect to see you here. I kept my voice low, controlled, but the anger was evident. You know, I didn't expect to see you here either, Jason. It seems you have a habit of showing up where you're not wanted. His face went slightly pale, but he kept that smirk on his face. Look, man, I don't want any trouble. I thought Sophie told you it was over. She did, I replied, keeping my gaze steady. But that doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't take away the damage you helped cause. His date shifted uncomfortably, glancing between us, clearly realizing she was in the middle of something she hadn't bargained for. Jason looked at her, as if weighing his options, then turned back to me. "I'm sorry if you feel that way," he said finally, his voice calm but insincere. "But what happened between me and Sophie, it's over now. You don't need to hold on to it." The audacity of his words nearly made me laugh. "Hold on to it? You don't get to tell me how to feel about this. You walked into my marriage, got involved with my wife, and now you're telling me to just let it go?" Jason looked away, the smug expression finally slipping as he realized the seriousness of the situation. "Look, I didn't mean to cause all this trouble. I thought we had something. But if she's chosen you, then that's that." "Something?" I repeated, feeling my voice shake with anger. "This wasn't just something to me, Jason. This was my life. My marriage." He didn't have a response, his gaze flickering to the woman beside him, who was looking increasingly uncomfortable. She murmured something to him, standing up to excuse herself, leaving Jason alone in the face of the reality he'd tried so hard to ignore. For a long moment, we just stared at each other, the silence heavy between us. I could see the cracks in his facade, the unease settling in as he realized there was nothing he could say to justify what he'd done. And maybe that was all I needed, a moment where he was forced to confront the pain he'd caused, a moment where he could no longer brush it off as something harmless. Without another word, I turned and walked back to Sophie, who had been watching the entire scene, her face tense with a mixture of fear and relief. She reached out as I sat down, placing a gentle hand on mine. "Are you all right?" she asked softly. I looked at her, seeing the worry in her eyes, and felt some of the anger dissipate, replaced by an overwhelming sadness. "I don't know, Sophie," I replied honestly. "I don't know if I'll ever be all right again after this. But I needed that. I needed him to know what he'd done, to see the damage." She nodded, her fingers brushing over mine in a way that was almost hesitant, as if she was afraid I'd pull away. "I understand, Jack. And I'm sorry that he showed up, that you had to face him like that." The evening felt heavy, the romantic nostalgia we tried to revive now overshadowed by the encounter. We finished our meal quietly, each of us lost in our own thoughts, processing the painful reminder of what we'd been through. As we left the restaurant, walking in silence through the crisp evening air, I felt the weight of our broken past settle between us once more. Maybe there was a chance to rebuild, to start over in some new way. But the scars would always be there, reminders of a love that had been tested and torn, reminders of the stranger who had nearly taken it all away. And as we walked hand in hand, I knew that whatever lay ahead, it would be a journey marked by a painful history, one we'd either survive together or succumb to, piece by fragile piece.